My daughter left her 3 children on my porch for just one afternoon to buy medicine, or so she said. She never came back. 10 years later, she arrived at my doorstep, not with a hug, but with a lawyer, a camera crew, and a warrant for my arrest, accusing me of kidnapping them. She stood before the cameras weeping, painting me as a monster who stole her babies. But when I stood before the judge and pulled a dusty wax-sealed envelope from my jacket pocket, the courtroom went silent. The judge looked at the contents, his face turning pale, and asked, "Do they know about this?" I replied, "Not yet. Before I tell you what was inside that envelope, please like and subscribe if you have ever had to fight for the ones you love." It was 6 in the morning on a Tuesday, the kind of quiet morning that usually promised a good day. The smell of frying bacon and brewing coffee filled my kitchen in Seattle. I was standing by the stove flipping eggs, humming a tune my wife used to love. At the table, my 3 grandkids were waking up. Leo, who was 15 now, was scrolling through his phone with that sleepy teenage frown. Mia, 13, was braiding her hair, and little Noah, 11, was already asking for seconds before he had even finished his firsts. We were a unit. We were safe. Or so I thought. The silence shattered in a heartbeat. A thunderous crash shook the entire house, vibrating through the floorboards and nearly knocking the spatula from my hand. It was not a knock. It was an assault. Before I could even turn off the stove, the front door splintered inward with a deafening crack. "Police! Get down! Get on the ground now!" The shouting was chaotic, a wall of noise that made no sense. Men in tactical gear swarmed into my living room, weapons drawn, pointing them at a 68-year-old man holding a spatula. Noah screamed, dropping his fork. Leo jumped up instinctively, moving to stand in front of his siblings, his hands trembling but his chin high. I raised my hands slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Officers, please, there are children here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to look at the terrified faces of the kids I had raised for a decade. A man stepped through the broken doorway. It was Sheriff Miller. I had known Miller for 20 years. We had fished together. I had fixed his deck. But today he would not look me in the eye. He looked at the floor, then at the handcuffs on his belt. "Wallace Bennett, you are under arrest," Miller said, his voice flat, devoid of our history. "Arrest," I asked, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "For what?" I paid my taxes. I kept my lawn mowed. I was invisible. "Kidnapping in the first degree, custodial interference, and unlawful imprisonment of minors." Miller recited the charges as if reading from a grocery list. One of the officers grabbed my wrists, twisting them behind my back. The cold steel of the cuffs bit into my skin, but the pain was nothing compared to the look on Noah's face. He was crying a high, thin sound that broke me. Grandpa Mia shrieked, trying to run to me, but a female officer held her back. "It is a mistake, kids," I yelled over the commotion as they shoved me toward the door. "It is just a mistake. Call Mr. Fletcher. Leo, call Mr. Fletcher." I was dragged out of the sanctuary I had built out into the cold morning air. I expected to see an empty street. Instead, I was blinded. Flashes, dozens of them. News vans were parked on my lawn, their satellite dishes extended like vultures waiting to feed. Reporters were shouting questions, microphones thrust in my direction like spears, and there, standing by a sleek black SUV, was the architect of this nightmare. Rachel. My daughter. She did not look like the woman I remembered. The Rachel I last saw 10 years ago was gaunt, shaking from withdrawal, wearing a stained hoodie, and smelling of desperation. This woman was polished. She wore oversized designer sunglasses, a tailored coat that cost more than my car, and her hair was perfectly styled. She was holding a smartphone up, live streaming the entire thing. "Oh my God, my babies," she wailed, her voice cracking perfectly for the camera. "I found you. Mommy found you. After 10 years of hell, I finally found you." She lunged toward the police line, not to hug the children, but to get a better angle for her phone. The camera crew she had brought with her zoomed in on her tear-streaked face. He stole them, she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at me. My own father. He stole my babies while I was in the hospital. He told me they were dead. He is a monster. I stopped struggling. I stood there cuffed and humiliated, watching the performance of a lifetime. She was lying with such ease, such conviction, that for a second even I wondered if I had lost my mind. But then I looked at Leo. My grandson, my brave boy, had followed the police out onto the porch. He saw the woman screaming about being his mother. He saw the cameras. And he did not run to her. He did not cry for mommy. He stepped forward, his face twisted in a rage I had never seen. "Who are you?" Leo shouted, his voice cracking with puberty and fury. "Get away from us!" Rachel faltered. The script she had written in her head did not account for this. She lowered her sunglasses, looking at the 6-foot-tall teenager glaring at her. "Leo, baby, it is me. It is mommy. Grandpa brainwashed you. He turned you against me." "You are not my mother," Leo spat back. "My mother left us. She left us for drugs. Grandpa is my father." "Get off my property." "Cut the feet," a man in a sharp suit whispered to Rachel, pulling her back. That was Brody, the new boyfriend. I could smell the grease on him from 20 feet away. He was not looking at the kids with love. He was looking at them like they were assets in a portfolio. "Get him in the car," Miller ordered, pushing me toward the cruiser. As the door slammed shut, separating me from the 3 children, who were my entire world, I watched Rachel collapse into Brody's arms, sobbing dramatically for the cameras. But I saw her eyes through the tinted glass. They were dry. They were cold. And they were calculating. I sat in the back of the police cruiser, the hard plastic seat digging into my back, and my mind drifted back 10 years. I remembered the rain. It was raining that night, too. Rachel had knocked on my door at 2 a.m. She was high jittery, scratching at her arms. Noah was burning up with a fever in her arms. Mia was crying in a dirty stroller. Leo was clinging to her leg, his eyes wide with the kind of fear no 5-year-old should know. "I am just going to the pharmacy, Dad," she had said, her eyes darting around. "Noah needs medicine. I cannot take them in the rain." "Watch them. Just for an hour." She put Noah in my arms. He was so hot. I took them in. I bathed them. I fed them warm soup. I waited. An hour became a night. A night became a week. A week became a decade. I filed police reports. I hired investigators. She had vanished. And now she was back, claiming I was the villain. The interrogation room was cold, designed to make you feel small. A single metal table bolted to the floor. A 2-way mirror that I knew hid watchful eyes. My handcuffs had been removed, but my freedom was gone. Sheriff Miller walked in carrying a thick file. He did not sit. He tossed the file onto the table. It slid across the metal surface and stopped inches from my hands. "You are in deep trouble, Wallace," Miller said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "We have the emails." "Emails?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "I do not use email, Miller. You know that." Rachel provided us with everything, Miller said, tapping the file. 7 years of correspondence. Her begging to see the kids. You replying that if she ever came near them, you would hurt them. Receipts of money transfers she sent you every month to support them. Money you claimed never arrived. I opened the file. My hands shook, not from fear, but from rage. There were printouts of emails from an address I had never created. There were Western Union receipts showing thousands of dollars sent to my name. "This is fiction," I said, looking up at Miller. "I never received a dime. I worked double shifts at the construction site until my back gave out to feed those kids. I cashed out my 401k to pay for Mia's braces. If she sent money, where is it?" "Check my bank accounts, Miller." "Check them." "We did," Miller said. "Or rather, we checked the accounts Rachel said you opened in the Cayman Islands." I laughed. A dry, bitter sound. The Cayman Islands. I have never even left the state of Washington, Miller. She has proof, Wallace Miller said, leaning in. She has a signed affidavit from a doctor stating she was in a coma for 6 months after the kids disappeared, recovering from the trauma of you taking them. She has witnesses who say you threatened to kill her. I leaned back in the chair. It was a setup. A meticulous, expensive, well-crafted setup. Rachel did not have the brains for this. This was Brody. This was a production. They did not just want the kids. They wanted to destroy me so completely that no one would ever believe a word I said. They wanted to erase the last 10 years. Why, I asked quietly. Why now? If she wanted them, she could have knocked on the door. Why the SWAT team? Why the cameras? Because she is a mother fighting for her children, Miller said, reciting the line he had been fed. No, I said, my voice hardening. I was an engineer, Miller. I built bridges. I know how to spot a stress fracture before the concrete cracks. This isn't about love. Love doesn't bring a camera crew to a reunion. Love doesn't wait 10 years. This is about something else. I looked Miller in the eye. I am done talking. I want my phone call. You want to call Leo? Miller asked. You can't. CPS has them. They are being processed into foster care until the hearing. The thought of Noah and Mia in a strange house, scared and alone, almost broke my composure. I clenched my fists under the table until my knuckles turned white. No, I said. I do not want to call my grandson. I want to call Mr. Fletcher. Miller frowned. Old man Fletcher, the estate lawyer. He has been retired for 5 years. He is senile, Wallace. You need a criminal defense attorney. I smiled a cold, thin smile that did not reach my eyes. Let me worry about Fletcher. Just give me the phone. Miller hesitated, then slid his phone across the table. I dialed the number from memory. It rang twice. Bennett, a voice rasped on the other end. Sharp, alert, not senile in the slightest. It has happened, I said. Protocol 1. There was a pause on the line, the sound of a heavy book closing. They brought the circus, Fletcher asked. They brought the whole carnival, I replied. Good, Fletcher said. I have the package. I am heading to the bank to open the safety deposit box. Do not say another word to the police. Do not sign anything. And Wallace. Yes, I hope you kept that receipt. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I looked old, tired. But inside, the engineer was waking up. I was calculating loads, vectors, and failure points. I kept everything, Fletcher. Burn them down. I hung up the phone. Miller was staring at me, confused. He thought he was looking at a defeated old man who had been caught in a lie. He didn't know he was looking at a man who had been preparing for war for a decade. I sat back and closed my eyes. Let Rachel have her moment. Let her cry for the cameras. Let her paint me as the villain. She had forgotten who raised her. She had forgotten that I was the one who taught her how to play chess. She thought she had checkmated me. She didn't realize I hadn't even moved my queen yet. The hearing was set for 2 days from now. 2 days for my grandkids to sit in a strange room wondering why their grandfather was a criminal. 2 days for Rachel to spin her narrative to the world. But also 2 days for Fletcher to retrieve the envelope. I looked at Miller. I am hungry, Sheriff. I never got to finish my eggs. Miller blinked, taken aback by my calmness. I will get you a sandwich. As he left the room, I stared at the blank gray wall and began to structure my defense. They wanted a show. I would give them a show. But the ending wasn't going to be the one they wrote. The ending was locked in a steel box in downtown Seattle, waiting for the light of day. And when it came out, it wouldn't just free me, it would bury them. The heavy metal door of the precinct clanged shut behind me, a sound that felt less like a release and more like being kicked out of the frying pan and directly into the fire. Fletcher was waiting by his vintage sedan, his face a mask of grim determination that mirrored the gray Seattle sky. He did not ask how I was. He did not offer empty platitudes. He simply opened the passenger door and nodded. That silence was the only kindness I had received in 12 hours. I had posted bail a sum that drained a significant chunk of my liquid savings, but money was just paper now. The real currency was time, and I was running out of it. As we drove through the city, I kept my head down. I felt branded. It was as if the word kidnapper had been carved into my forehead for every passerby to see. My phone, which Fletcher had retrieved from property storage, was buzzing incessantly in my pocket. It was a rhythmic pulse of hatred. Unknown numbers, threatening texts, voicemails that started with heavy breathing and ended with promises of violence. I turned it off and threw it onto the dashboard. We turned onto my street, the street where I had taught Leo to ride a bike, where I had walked Mia to the bus stop every morning, where Noah had scraped his knees on the sidewalk. It should have been a sanctuary. Instead, it was a crime scene. "Slow down," I murmured to Fletcher, my breath catching in my throat. My house, the modest two-story craftsman I had restored with my own hands, was unrecognizable. It looked like it had been bleeding. Bright red paint splattered across the white siding, dripping down onto the porch like an open wound. The word predator was spray-painted in jagged black letters across the garage door. The front lawn, usually immaculate, was littered with trash and broken eggshells. But it was the people that stopped my heart. My neighbors. People I had shared tools with. People whose packages I had collected when they were on vacation. Mrs. Higgins from across the street was standing on her porch, her arms crossed, shaking her head with a look of pure disgust. When she saw Fletcher's car slow down, she didn't wave. She spat on the ground and turned her back. "They bought it." I whispered, a cold numbness spreading through my chest. They bought every word of it. "Drive into the garage," Wallace Fletcher said, his voice cutting through my shock. "Do not stop. Do not look at them. Use the remote." I fumbled for the opener, and as the defaced garage door groaned upward, a fresh volley of eggs struck the car. I saw a teenager, a boy Leo used to play basketball with, winding up his arm for another throw. The betrayal stung worse than the vandalism. The garage door closed, sealing us in the semi-darkness. I sat there for a moment, gripping the door handle, afraid to go inside. Afraid of the silence. "Go," Fletcher said gently. "I have to make calls. I will be in shortly." I stepped into the kitchen. It was frozen in time, a snapshot of the moment my life ended. The skillet was still on the stove, the bacon cold and congealed in white grease. Noah's plate was still on the table, his fork resting in half-eaten eggs. A carton of orange juice sat sweating on the counter, a puddle of condensation forming around its base. The silence was physical. It pressed against my eardrums. No laughter. No bickering over the iPad. No footsteps thumping on the stairs. The air felt thin, empty, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for the children who wouldn't be coming back. I walked to the table and picked up Noah's fork. My hand trembled so violently that I dropped it, the clatter echoing like a gunshot in the empty room. They were gone. Taken by strangers. Taken to a facility where they would be scared and confused, wondering why Grandpa didn't stop the bad men. The guilt was a physical weight heavy enough to crush a bridge. I walked into the living room and sat in my recliner, not bothering to turn on the lights. The red light of the television stared at me. I knew I shouldn't. Fletcher would tell me not to, but I had to know what I was up against. I picked up the remote and pressed the power button. It was on every channel. Breaking news. The chyron at the bottom of the screen screamed in bold red letters, "The miracle of the Bennett kids." And there she was. Rachel. She was sitting on a podium flanked by microphones. She looked fragile, her makeup artfully done to suggest exhaustion and sorrow. She was dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. Next to her sat Brody. He looked like a shark in a $3,000 suit, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. guiding her performing for the lenses. "I just want to thank the community for their support," Rachel whispered into the microphone, her voice trembling perfectly. "For 10 years I lived in a nightmare. My father, he told me they were dead. He told me if I ever came back he would kill them. I was a prisoner of my own grief." The camera zoomed in. She looked directly into the lens, and for a second I saw the glint of triumph in her eyes before she masked it with tears. "But today justice begins," she continued. "I have hired the best legal team to ensure that man never hurts another child again. We are launching the Save the Bennett Kids Foundation today to help other mothers separated from their babies." Brody leaned into the microphone, his voice smooth and authoritative. "We are asking for privacy, but also for support. We have set up a GoFundMe to help Rachel establish a home for these traumatized children. We need to show the court that these kids belong with their mother, not a kidnapper." I watched as the donation counter on the bottom of the screen ticked up. $5,000, $10,000, $50,000. The world was paying her to destroy me. Then the hashtag appeared on the screen. Save the Bennett Kids. It was trending #1 globally. Millions of people, strangers who didn't know me, didn't know. I taught Mia how to braid her hair, or helped Leo with his algebra, were calling for my head. They were calling me a monster, a captor, a thief of childhoods. I turned off the TV, plunging the room back into darkness. The blue afterimage of the screen burned in my eyes. I was not just fighting Rachel anymore. I was fighting the narrative. I was fighting the world. Fletcher walked in, placing a hand on my shoulder. He had seen it too. "It is a good performance," Fletcher said, his voice dry. "It is a lynching," I replied, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. "It is noise," Wallace Fletcher corrected. "Just noise. Noise does not hold up in court. Evidence does." I looked at the empty hallway leading to the bedrooms. I could almost see the ghosts of the kids running past. "They took them, Fletcher. CPS took them. They are alone. They are safe from her for now," Fletcher said. "That is what matters. If she had custody tonight, she would be parading them on talk shows by tomorrow morning. CPS is a neutral ground. It buys us time." I stood up and walked to the window, peering through the blinds at the street. A news van had pulled up to the curb. A reporter was applying lipstick in the side mirror, getting ready to do a stand-up report in front of my vandalized home. "I am the enemy," I whispered. "I am public enemy #1. "Let them hate you," Fletcher said, opening his briefcase on the coffee table. "Let them throw eggs. Let them paint the house. It makes them feel righteous. But righteousness is cheap. The truth is expensive. And we are the only ones who can afford it." He pulled out a yellow legal pad and a pen. "Sit down, Wallace. We have work to do. We need to reconstruct the last 10 years day by day. Every doctor's visit, every report card, every lie she told. We are going to build a fortress of facts that no hashtag can penetrate." I looked at the old lawyer. He was 70 years old, frail, but his eyes were sharp as flint. He was the only person in the world who believed me. I sat down. I picked up the pen, and as the eggs continued to thud against the siding of my house, I began to write. I wrote for Leo. I wrote for Mia. I wrote for Noah. I wrote to burn the lies to the ground. They wanted a villain. I would show them what happens when you corner a man who has nothing left to lose but the truth. The visitation room at the Department of Child Services was a windowless box painted a suffocating shade of beige. It smelled of industrial cleaner and stale despair. There were no toys, no comfortable chairs, just a metal table bolted to the floor and a clock on the wall that seemed to tick louder than my own heartbeat. I sat with my hands clasped on the table, trying to stop them from shaking. 15 minutes. That was all the judge had granted me. 15 minutes to undo 48 hours of trauma. 15 minutes to remind 3 terrified children that I was not the monster the world said I was. Ms. Halloway, the caseworker assigned to the children, stood by the door with a clipboard and a face carved from stone. She looked at me with open suspicion. To her, I was just another predator in a long line of bad men she had encountered. She checked her watch, tapped her pen, and finally opened the heavy security door. They walked in single file like prisoners of war. Noah came first. My little 11-year-old, usually a ball of energy, who ran everywhere he went, was dragging his feet. His eyes were red and swollen, fixed firmly on the linoleum floor. Mia followed, her arms wrapped tight around her chest, hunching her shoulders as if trying to disappear inside her own skin. And then Leo. My 15-year-old grandson looked 10 years older than he had 2 days ago. His jaw was clenched so hard I could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. He looked at me, then looked at the social worker, his eyes darting with a feral, trapped intensity. "Sit," Ms. Halloway commanded, pointing to the chairs opposite me. "No physical contact. No whispering. Everything you say is being recorded." I wanted to leap across the table. I wanted to gather them into my arms and promise them that we would go home and have ice cream and forget this nightmare. But I stayed frozen. One wrong move, one emotional outburst, and Ms. Halloway would end the visit. I knew the game. I had to play it. "Hi, guys," I said, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to sound strong. "I missed you." Silence. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that filled the small room. Noah didn't look up. Mia bit her lip until it turned white. "Are they feeding you okay?" I asked, desperate for a connection. Is it safe?" "It is fine," Leo muttered, staring at the table. "It is just a room." Then Noah slowly lifted his head. The look in his eyes stopped my breath. It wasn't fear. It was betrayal. It was the look of a child who has had his foundation ripped out from under him. Grandpa Noah whispered, his voice trembling. "Is it true?" "Is what true, buddy?" I asked, gently leaning forward as much as I dared. "Mom came to see us yesterday," Noah said, tears spilling over his lashes. She told us about Daddy." My heart hammered against my ribs. Rachel had never spoken about their father. To them, he was just a shadow, a man who died before they could form a memory. I had always told them he was a good man who passed away too young, protecting them from the gritty reality of their mother's past. "What did she tell you, Noah?" "She said you killed him." Noah blurted out the words, rushing out like a confession. "She said Daddy wanted to take us away from you, so you hurt him. She said you buried him so nobody would find out, and then you stole us so she couldn't tell the police." The air left my lungs. I felt as if I had been punched in the gut. It was a lie so vile, so calculated that I couldn't speak. She was planting seeds of murder in the mind of an 11-year-old boy. She wasn't just trying to win custody. She was trying to assassinate my soul in the eyes of the people I loved most. "Noah, look at me," I said, my voice fierce. "Look at me. That is a lie. I never hurt your father. I never hurt anyone. Your mother, she is confused. She is saying things that aren't true because she wants to win." "She didn't look confused," Mia whispered, finally speaking up. Her voice was barely audible. "She looked angry. She grabbed my arm, Grandpa. She squeezed it really hard. She said if we ever trusted you again, we were stupid." I looked at the social worker. Ms. Halloway was writing furiously on her clipboard, her face impassive. Did she not hear this? Did she not care that a mother was terrorizing her children? Leo slammed his hand on the table, making us all jump. Even Ms. Halloway looked up. "Stop it," Leo hissed at his siblings. "Stop crying. That is what she wants." He turned his blazing eyes on me. It wasn't anger at me. It was anger for me. "She didn't just talk," Grandpa Leo said, his voice dropping to a low, intense growl. "She gave us a script." "A script?" I asked, confused. "She came with that man, Brody." Leo continued speaking fast, as if he had to get the words out before he was silenced. They sat us down in the visiting room. Brody had a notebook. He told us that when we go to see the judge, we have to say specific things. We have to practice. What things, Leo? I asked, my blood turning to ice. Leo took a deep breath, his hands shaking on the metal table. We have to say that you lock us in the basement when we get bad grades. We have to say that you hit us with a belt. We have to say that you told us our mom was dead, and that we weren't allowed to say her name. But we don't have a basement. I said, the absurdity of the lie almost making me laugh. The house is on a slab foundation. I know that, Leo snapped. I told her that. I told her the judge would know. And Brody laughed. He said it doesn't matter what the house looks like. He said, if all three of us say it, and we cry when we say it, the judge will believe us because kids don't lie about abuse. I stared at my grandson, a boy who was being forced to grow up way too fast. This was not a custody battle. This was a demolition. Rachel and Brody weren't just fighting dirty. They were manufacturing a horror movie and casting me as the villain. They were coaching my grandchildren to commit perjury, to destroy an innocent man just to secure a narrative. And there was something else, Leo said, his voice dropping even lower. He glanced at Ms. Holloway, then leaned in. Brody told Mom that once they get us, once the judge signs the papers, they are going to put us in a boarding school in Switzerland. He said we would be out of her hair, and she could focus on the show. The show, I repeated. Yeah, Leo said. They are filming a documentary. The Lost Children. Brody said we are the stars. He said our tears are going to buy them a mansion. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening thud. It wasn't about love. It wasn't even about hate. It was about content. Rachel didn't want to be a mother. She wanted to be a martyr. She wanted the fame, the sympathy, the book deals, and the reality TV contracts. And once the cameras were off, she would ship these kids off to a boarding school on the other side of the world, paid for by the money she made from destroying our lives. She was selling them. She was selling their trauma, their childhoods, and my freedom to the highest bidder. I looked at Noah, who was still wiping his eyes. I looked at Mia, who was trembling. I looked at Leo, who was trying so hard to be the man of the house in a house that no longer existed. Listen to me, I said, my voice steady, putting every ounce of authority and love I had into my words. You do not lie. Do you hear me? No matter what they say, no matter what they threaten you with, you tell the truth. The truth is the only thing that stands. But she said you'll go to jail if we don't. Noah sobbed. She said, if we don't say the basement stuff, the police will take you away forever. I am not going anywhere, I promised, though I didn't know how I could keep that promise. I am fighting this, but I need you to be brave. Can you be brave for me? 5 minutes. Ms. Holloway announced from the corner. Leo looked at me, his eyes searching mine. Grandpa, do you have the envelope? I froze. I had never told Leo about the envelope. Not explicitly, but he was smart. He had seen me check the safe deposit box key on my keychain every year on their birthdays. He had seen the way I looked at the old grandfather clock where I kept the spare key. What envelope, Leo? The one you told Mom about that night, Leo whispered. I was 5, but I remember. You told her if she ever came back, you would open the envelope. I felt a surge of pride so strong it almost brought me to my knees. He remembered. He remembered the night she left. He remembered the argument. He remembered the leverage. I have it, Leo, I said softly. Then use it. Leo said, his voice hard. Use it, Grandpa. Destroy her. Before she destroys us. Time is up. Ms. Holloway barked, stepping forward. Stand up, Mr. Bennett. Step away from the table. I stood up slowly. The kids stood up too. Noah looked like he wanted to run to me, but Leo held him back, gripping his shoulder. I love you, I said. I love you all more than anything. Remember who you are. Remember who raised you. We know who our dad is, Leo said, his voice ringing clear in the sterile room. It is you. It has always been you. Ms. Halloway opened the door and ushered them out. They walked away, three small figures against a massive, corrupt system. As the door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the silence, the despair I had felt earlier evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, mechanical rage. Rachel had made a fatal error. She thought she was manipulating children. She didn't realize she was radicalizing them against her. She thought she was fighting a lonely old man. She didn't realize she was fighting a man who had nothing left to lose. I turned to Ms. Halloway. I am ready to go back to my cell now. She looked at me, and for the first time her expression faltered. She saw something in my face that unsettled her. Maybe it was the calm. Maybe it was the fact that I wasn't crying anymore. I walked out of that visitation room with a singular focus. I needed to get to the bank. I needed to get the envelope. And then I was going to grant Leo's wish. I wasn't just going to win. I was going to burn their entire script to ashes. The rain in Seattle does not wash things clean, it just makes the grime slicker. I pulled the collar of my coat up to hide my face as I ducked into Joe's all-night diner. It was the kind of place that smelled of stale cigarette smoke and burnt onions, a hole in the wall tucked under the shadow of the I-5 overpass. It was the last place on earth a camera crew would look for a man accused of kidnapping 3 children. It was perfect. I spotted Fletcher in the back booth, his silhouette framed by the flickering neon sign buzzing in the window. He did not look like the high-powered defense attorney he once was. He looked like a man weary of the world's nonsense. He was nursing a black coffee, his eyes scanning a stack of documents with the precision of a hawk hunting a field mouse. I slid into the booth opposite him. The vinyl squeaked, a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet diner. Fletcher did not look up immediately. He finished reading a paragraph, underlined something with a red pen, and then only then did he raise his eyes to meet mine. "You look like hell, Wallace," he said, his voice gravelly and devoid of sympathy. "I feel like I have been run over by a freight train." "Fletcher," I replied, signaling the waitress for coffee. "I just saw the kids." Fletcher set his pen down. "How are they?" Terrified, I said, the image of Noah's tear-stained face flashing in my mind. "Brainwashed. Rachel and that shark Brody have them reciting lines like actors in a school play. They are accusing me of abuse, Fletcher. They are saying I locked them in a basement I do not even have." Fletcher sighed, a long, rattling sound. "It is a standard playbook, Wallace. Alienation. Vilification. They are scorching the earth so there is no ground left for you to stand on. They do not just want custody. They want you in prison so you can never contest the trust fund." "Trust fund?" I asked, confused. "I thought this was about the reality show." "It is about both," Fletcher said, tapping a document on the table. "But mostly it is about the money you have been hiding. Or rather, the money they think you do not have." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" Fletcher leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They think you are a broke retiree, Wallace. They think you are scraping by on Social Security and a pension from a construction job. That is the narrative they are selling. The poor, desperate grandfather clinging to the kids for the welfare checks." I snorted. "Let them think that. It makes them sloppy." "It makes them dangerous," Fletcher corrected sharply. "Because they think you are weak. They do not know who they are dealing with. They do not know that the man sitting across from me is not just a retired construction worker. They do not know that you are the structural engineer who designed the seismic dampeners for the Bay Bridge. They do not know you hold 7 patents on tension cable alloys that are used in every suspension bridge built in the last 15 years. I looked away, staring out the window at the rain-streaked concrete of the highway above us. I built that overpass too, 30 years ago. "That life is over, Fletcher," I said quietly. I walked away from it the day Rachel dropped those kids on my porch. I traded the boardrooms and the royalties for diaper changes and parent-teacher conferences. I did not want them growing up knowing their grandfather was worth millions. I wanted them to grow up normal. I wanted them to know the value of $1 earned by sweat, not by patents. And that was noble, Fletcher said, his tone hard. But nobility is getting your ass kicked right now. You are sitting on a war chest, Wallace. You have resources that could bury Rachel and Brody in litigation for the next century. Why are we playing defense? Why are we letting them control the narrative? Because money does not solve this, I snapped, keeping my voice low. Money buys lawyers. It buys experts. But it does not buy the truth. Rachel is their mother. In the eyes of the law, she has a biological right. If I reveal who I really am, if I reveal the fortune, they will just spin it. They will say I used my wealth to isolate the kids. They will say I bought them. It feeds their story, Fletcher. Fletcher rubbed his temples. You are stubborn, Wallace. You always were. That is why you were the best engineer I ever represented. You never compromised on the foundation. But listen to me. We have a problem. What problem? The evidence, Fletcher said. We have the emails proving she did not contact you. We have the school records showing you were the primary caregiver. We have neighbors who will testify eventually that you were a good father. But none of that proves she is unfit to be a mother now. I stared at him. She abandoned them for 10 years. Abandonment is a gray area, Fletcher said, frustration creeping into his voice. She has a story. She says she was coerced. She says she was threatened. She says she was in a coma. It is all lies, but it is plausible enough to create reasonable doubt. The courts default to the mother, Wallace, especially a mother who looks good on camera, who has a foundation, and who is claiming she was the victim of a controlling father. We can prove she left. We cannot prove she did not want to come back. We need a knockout. He looked me dead in the eye. We need to prove she did not just leave them. We need to prove she sold them. The diner seemed to go silent. The clatter of dishes, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic, it all faded into a buzzing white noise. I felt the weight of the key in my pocket. It was a heavy, old-fashioned brass key warm against my leg. I had carried it every day for 10 years. It was my insurance policy. My nuclear option. I have it, I whispered. Fletcher froze. You have what? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the key. I placed it on the chipped laminate table. It sat there between us, dull and unassuming, yet holding the power to destroy 3 lives. The red envelope, I said. Fletcher stared at the key, then up at me. His eyes widened. You kept it. I told you to destroy it 10 years ago. I told you it was illegal. I told you if anyone found it, you could be charged with purchasing human beings. I did not buy them, Fletcher, I said, my voice shaking with the memory of that night. I paid a ransom. There is a difference. I remember the rain that night. I remember Rachel standing in my doorway, pupils blown wide, shaking from withdrawal. She didn't want medicine for Noah. She wanted money for a fix. She told me she was done. She told me she wished they had never been born. She told me for $50,000 she would sign them over and disappear. I told her I would give her $100,000 if she put it in writing and did it on video. You recorded it? Fletcher asked, his voice barely a breath. I recorded everything, I confirmed. The negotiation, the signature, the handover. It is all in the box. The contract she signed relinquishing all parental rights in exchange for the check. The cashed check with her signature on the back. And the DVD. Fletcher let out a long, slow whistle. He picked up the key as if it were made of radioactive material. Does she know you have this? She thinks I lost it, I said. Or she thinks I wouldn't dare use it because it implicates me too. She thinks I am too afraid of going to jail to reveal that I paid her off. "And are you?" Fletcher asked. "Are you afraid?" I looked at the key. I thought about Leo's eyes in that visitation room. I thought about Noah asking if I killed his father. I thought about Mia trembling in fear. I am 68 years old, Fletcher. I have lived a full life. I have built bridges that will stand for 100 years. I raised 3 children who are kind, smart, and brave. If I have to spend the rest of my life in a cell to ensure they never have to spend another minute with that woman, then so be it. Fletcher closed his hand around the key. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He looked solemn, like a general accepting the codes for a weapon he hoped never to use. "This is it, Wallace," he said. "This is the end of the line. Once we introduce this into evidence, there is no going back. You will be admitting to a felony to prove hers. You might lose your freedom." I leaned forward. "I lost my freedom the day she came back, Fletcher. Now I am just fighting for theirs. Go to the bank. Get the envelope. Do not open it until we are in front of the judge. I want her to see it. I want to see the look on her face when she realizes that the past she sold has finally come back to collect the debt." Fletcher nodded. He stood up, gathering his files. He looked 10 years younger than he had when I walked in. He had a mission now. He had the ammunition. "Stay low, Wallace," he said. "Do not talk to anyone. Do not answer the door. I will see you in court." He walked out into the rain, the key safely in his pocket. I sat in the booth for a long time watching the neon sign buzz. I finished my cold coffee. I left a $20 bill on the table, enough to cover the coffee and buy the waitress a decent meal. As I walked back out into the wet Seattle night, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I didn't feel like a hunted man. I felt like the engineer I used to be. I had identified the structural flaw in Rachel's lies. I had calculated the stress points. And now I had just handed my lawyer the dynamite to bring the whole thing down. Let them have their press conferences. Let them have their hashtags. I had the truth sealed in wax, waiting to explode. And when the dust settled, only one of us would be left standing. The office of my attorney, Fletcher, was a sanctuary of dust motes and mahogany, a place where time seemed to slow down just enough to let a man think. But today, the air was thick with a tension that made thinking nearly impossible. I sat in a leather chair that had likely been new when Nixon was president, my eyes fixed on a small, unassuming digital recorder sitting in the center of the desk. Beside me sat Mercer, a private investigator Fletcher had kept on retainer for 30 years. Mercer was a man who blended into the background, the kind of guy you would forget 5 seconds after seeing him, which made him dangerous. He had been tailing Brody for 48 hours. "You are not going to like this," Wallace Mercer said, his voice raspy from years of chain smoking. "But it explains everything. It explains the timing. It explains the budget. It explains why they are coming at you with a nuclear warhead instead of a fly swatter." "Play it," Fletcher commanded, leaning back in his chair, his fingers steepled. Mercer pressed the button. The audio was grainy at first, the sound of wind and traffic, then the heavy thud of a car door closing. The interior of a car. Silence, then the unmistakable oily voice of Brody filled the room. He was on a phone call. "I do not care what the old man says," Brody's voice sneered through the speaker. "He is a speed bump. We are bulldozing him. Listen to me, Sinclair. The hearing is on Thursday. I need the paperwork ready to file in Texas the second that gavel drops in Seattle." There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke unintelligible to us. Then Brody laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "No, you do not get it," Brody continued. "The grandfather has no idea. Rachel told him the father was some junkie she met at a rave who died in a gutter. She played the tragic widow card perfectly. The old fool thinks he is protecting them from a drug addict's legacy. He does not know he is sitting on a gold mine. I frowned, looking at Fletcher. Rachel had told me the father was a musician named Jax, who died of an overdose before Noah was born. She had cried on my shoulder about it. The recording continued. The old man Hawthorne kicked the bucket last Tuesday, Brody said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The obituary is already in the Times. He left everything to his direct descendants. His son, that junkie Jax, was the only heir. And since Jax is dead, the estate bypasses him and goes directly to the issue. That means the 3 brats. My breath hitched. Hawthorne. The name was vaguely familiar, like something I had seen on the business pages of a newspaper years ago. 15 million, Sinclair Brody said, savoring the words. $15 million in a trust, plus the mineral rights in the Permian Basin. But the stipulation is clear. The funds are managed by the legal guardian until the children turn 25. If we get custody, we control the trust. We control the administration fees. We control the lifestyle expenses. The recording ended with the sound of Brody starting the engine of his car. The silence in Fletcher's office was absolute. I felt like the floor had dissolved beneath my feet. For 10 years, I thought I was raising 3 orphans whose father was a tragic footnote. I thought Rachel had abandoned them because she was an addict who couldn't handle the responsibility. I was wrong. She didn't come back for love. She didn't come back for a reality show, though. That was a nice bonus. She came back because the grandfather she never told me about had died, and his death had unlocked a vault. Who is Hawthorne? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Fletcher slid a file across the desk. Jeremiah Hawthorne, Texas oil tycoon, died last week of heart failure, net worth in the billions. He had one estranged son, Jackson Hawthorne, who went by Jax. Jackson died of a heroin overdose 10 years ago, right around the time Rachel showed up on your porch. I opened the file. There was a picture of an old man in a cowboy hat, looking stern and unforgiving. And next to it a picture of a younger man, disheveled, wild-eyed, who looked exactly like Leo. The jawline, the eyes. It was undeniable. So the kids? I stammered. They are heirs, Mercer finished. They are the sole beneficiaries of their father's share of the estate. That 15 million Brody mentioned, that is just the liquid assets. The mineral rights could be worth double that over time. I felt a wave of nausea. This was why. This was why she had returned with a SWAT team. This was why she had lawyers who charged $1,000 an hour. It wasn't an emotional reclamation. It was a hostile takeover. My grandchildren were not children to her. They were winning lottery tickets she had left in a drawer for a decade, and now she was back to cash them in. She knew, I said, realizing the depth of the deception. She knew who the father was the whole time. She likely knew he came from money, Fletcher agreed. But she probably didn't know how to get to it until the old man died. Or maybe Brody figured it out. He is a predator, Wallace. He sniffed out the money trail. He realized that if Rachel secured custody, they could pay themselves millions in management fees before the kids ever saw a dime. They would drain that trust fund dry under the guise of providing a suitable lifestyle. I thought about the boarding school in Switzerland Leo had mentioned. It made perfect sense now. They would ship the kids off, keep them out of sight, and live like kings on the children's inheritance. They would spend Noah's college fund on sports cars and Mia's future on designer clothes. And if I lose, I whispered. If you lose, Fletcher said grimly, removing his glasses and rubbing his eyes. Those kids become ATM machines. Rachel and Brody will have legal authority to access the trust for the benefit of the children. They will buy a mansion and claim it is necessary for the children's security. They will travel first class and claim it is for the children's education. By the time Leo is 25, there won't be anything left but debt. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through me. It was one thing to abandon your children. It was another to return only to cannibalize their future. They were going to strip mine, my grandchildren's lives. Does the court know? I asked. No, Fletcher said. And Rachel certainly hasn't listed it in her financial disclosures. She is pleading poverty, remember. She is the struggling mother who needs public support. If the judge finds out she is chasing a $15 million payday, her poor mother narrative falls apart. It establishes motive. Greed, not love. We have to tell the judge, I said, standing up. We will, Fletcher said, his eyes gleaming. But not yet. We need to let them perjure themselves first. We need Brody to get on the stand and claim he is doing this out of the goodness of his heart. We need Rachel to testify that she has no financial interest in this. Once they lie under oath, we drop the hammer. I walked to the window looking out at the gray city. I felt a strange shift inside me. Before I was fighting to keep my grandkids safe from emotional harm. Now I was fighting to save their entire future. I was the only thing standing between them and two vultures who would pick their bones clean. They are not just bad parents, I said, my voice hardening into steel. They are thieves. They are trying to steal a fortune from 3 children who don't even know it exists. Exactly, Mercer said, pocketing the recorder. And that gives us leverage. But it also makes them desperate. $15 million makes people do crazy things, Wallace. If they think you know, if they think you are going to block them from the money, they won't just try to ruin your reputation. They might try to remove you permanently. I turned back to them. Let them try. I built skyscrapers that survived earthquakes. I can handle a couple of grifters. Fletcher nodded slowly. Good. Because it is about to get dirty. Brody slipped up on the phone, but he won't make that mistake again. He is going to realize that the only way to get that money is to make sure you are completely discredited. He needs you to look like a monster, so the judge grants full, unsupervised custody immediately. I thought about the red envelope in the safety deposit box. The contract. The check. It was powerful, yes. But this was the motive. The envelope proved she left them. The trust fund proved why she came back. Together they were the key to locking her out of their lives forever. I looked at the picture of the man who was my grandkid's father, Jax Hawthorne. He looked sad. Lost. He had died alone, likely because of the same demons Rachel battled. I wouldn't let his children suffer the same fate. I wouldn't let his legacy fund the lifestyle of the woman who abandoned his babies. Get everything on the Hawthorne estate, I told Fletcher. Every document, every will. I want to know exactly what those kids are worth down to the cent. Because when I walk into that courtroom, I am not just going to be the grandfather. I am going to be the trustee. And I am going to make sure Rachel never touches a single penny of that money. Fletcher smiled a rare, shark-like grin. Now you are thinking like a lawyer, Wallace. No, I said, putting my coat back on. I am thinking like a father. And a father protects his own. I left the office with a new weight on my shoulders, but also a new clarity. The stakes had just gone up exponentially. It wasn't just a custody battle anymore. It was a heist in progress. And I was the only security guard on duty. I had to be perfect. I had to be stone. Because if I cracked even for a second, my grandkids would lose everything. Rachel wanted a war. She was about to find out that she had picked a fight with a man who knew how to bring down the whole house without scratching the foundation. The grocery store was a torture chamber of memories I had not anticipated. I stood in aisle 4, my hand hovering over a box of sugary cereal, the kind with the cartoon tiger on the front, that Noah insisted was a vital food group. My fingers brushed the cardboard, and for a split second, I forgot. I forgot the SWAT team, the jail cell, and the empty bedrooms. I just thought about how Noah's face lit up on Saturday mornings. Then the reality crashed back down on me, heavy and suffocating. I wasn't buying breakfast for 3 growing kids anymore. I was buying frozen dinners for one old man who had lost his appetite. I pulled my hand back as if the box were hot. I pushed the cart forward, the wheels squeaking a lonely rhythm on the linoleum. People were staring. I could feel their eyes burning into the back of my neck. In a small town like this, the news cycle moved faster than the speed of light. To the woman in the produce section, I wasn't Wallace who fixed her pergola last summer. I was the kidnapper from the 6 o'clock news. She pulled her child closer as I passed, shielding him from me. I kept my head down, focusing on the scuffed toes of my work boots. I bought a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a carton of milk. It was a pathetic haul, the diet of a man who has given up on cooking, given up on the joy of a shared meal. I walked out to the parking lot, the plastic bag cutting into my fingers. It was dusk, that gray, ambiguous time of day, where shadows stretch long and distort the world. I had parked my truck in the far corner near the loading docks, trying to avoid having my license plate photographed again. The area was dimly lit, the surveillance cameras from the store pointed toward the main entrance, leaving this back row in a blind spot. She was waiting for me. Rachel was leaning against the driver's side door of my truck, a silhouette cut from the darkness. She wasn't wearing the designer coat or the oversized sunglasses she used for her press conferences. She was wearing jeans and a leather jacket, looking more like the street-tough teenager she used to be than the grieving mother she was pretending to play. The glow of a cigarette illuminated her face as she took a long, hard drag. She didn't move as I approached. She just exhaled a plume of smoke into the cool air, blocking my path to the door. "Hello, Dad," she said. Her voice was different. Gone was the trembling, tearful soprano she used for the cameras. This was a voice of gravel and sandpaper, the voice of a woman who had spent the last decade in dive bars and back alleys. "Get out of my way, Rachel," I said, shifting the grocery bag to my other hand. I was tired. My bones ached. I didn't have the energy for her games. "We need to have a little chat," she said, not budging. "Just you and me. No lawyers, no cameras, just family." She said the word family like it was a punchline to a dirty joke. "We have nothing to talk about," I replied, reaching for my keys. "You said everything you needed to say on national television." Rachel laughed, a harsh, barking sound. That is just business. You know how it is. You have to sell the story. But this is reality." She took another drag of the cigarette, the embers glowing angry red, and stepped closer. She invaded my personal space, smelling of menthol and expensive perfume that couldn't quite mask the scent of old habits. She blew the smoke directly into my face. I coughed, turning my head away, but she grabbed my chin with a grip that was surprisingly strong. "Look at me, old man," she hissed. "You look tired. You look like you are about one bad day away from a heart attack. Do you really think you can win this? Do you really think a judge is going to give 3 kids to a man who is pushing 70 and living on a pension?" I pulled my face away from her grip. "I am their father in every way that matters, Rachel. I raised them. I know their allergies. I know their nightmares. You do not even know their middle names." "I know enough," she sneered. "I know they are my ticket. And I know you are the only thing standing in my way. So I am going to make you an offer. A one-time offer. Because despite everything, I am a generous daughter." She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She tucked it into the breast pocket of my flannel shirt, patting my chest condescendingly. "Sign the papers, Dad. Sign over full custody. Admit you made a mistake. Tell the court you are too old, too sick, whatever. Just give them to me. And if I do," I asked, my voice steady, my eyes locked on hers. "If you do," Rachel said, leaning in close, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "Brody and I will cut you a check. $50,000. Think about it. That is a lot of money for a guy like you. You can fix up this truck. You can go to Florida. You can rot in a nice retirement home instead of a cell." 50 grand, Dad. It is a retirement package. I stared at her. She thought she was offering me a fortune. She thought $50,000 was the price of 3 human souls. She thought she was buying me off with pocket change. It was insulting, yes, but it was also revealing. It showed me exactly how little she thought I was worth. It showed me she had no idea who I really was. And if I don't sign, I asked. Rachel's face hardened. The mask of the negotiator fell away, revealing the predator beneath. If you don't, you die in prison, she spat. Kidnapping is a felony, Dad. 20 years. You won't last 2, and you know the law. The courts always side with the mother, especially the mother who cries on cue. I will bury you. I will make sure you die alone in a cage, wondering why you didn't just take the money and run. She took another drag, her eyes narrowing. Don't be stupid, Wallace. You are out of your league. Brody has lawyers who eat guys like you for breakfast. Take the 50,000. Walk away. It is more than you deserve. I looked at my daughter. I looked at the woman I had bounced on my knee, the woman I had tried to save 1,000 times. And I realized that the daughter I loved was gone. She had died a long time ago, replaced by this hollow, greedy shell standing in front of me. There was no redemption here. There was only calculation. I let a small, dry chuckle escape my lips. It started low in my chest and worked its way up until I was shaking with it. 50,000, I repeated, shaking my head. Rachel frowned, confused by my reaction. She expected fear. She expected anger. She didn't expect amusement. Yeah, 50,000, she said uncertainly. It is a good offer. I looked her dead in the eye, and for the first time in days, I let the engineer come out. I let the man who commanded crews of hundreds, the man who managed budgets in the hundreds of millions, step into the light. $50,000, I said, my voice dripping with disdain. Is that my price, Rachel? Is that the value you place on your own children? You are cheap. Excuse me, she snapped, stepping back. I thought you were smarter than this. I continued, my voice hardening into steel. I thought if you were going to sell your own flesh and blood, you would at least get market value for them. 50,000. That is pathetic. I expected you to ask for a cut of the real prize. Rachel froze. The cigarette burned down to the filter in her fingers, but she didn't notice. Her eyes darted back and forth, scanning my face for a bluff. What are you talking about? She whispered. I leaned in, closing the distance between us until I was the one invading her space. I towered over her, letting my shadow swallow her up. I am talking about Jeremiah Hawthorne, I said. The color drained from her face so fast it looked like she had been slapped. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The cigarette dropped from her numb fingers, hitting the asphalt with a shower of sparks. I am talking about the $15 million trust fund, Rachel, I said, savoring the terror in her eyes. I am talking about the mineral rights in Texas. I am talking about the fact that those kids aren't just children to you. They are golden geese. You didn't come back for them. You came back because the old man died and you want to cash in. How do you? She stammered, stepping back, her heel catching on a crack in the pavement. She stumbled, grabbing the side mirror of my truck to steady herself. I know everything, I said, my voice low and dangerous. I know about Brody. I know about the plan to ship them to Switzerland. I know you are broke and this is your last Hail Mary. You thought I was just a dumb construction worker, didn't you? You thought I was a senile old man you could bully with a camera crew. I picked up the grocery bag, the plastic crinkling in the silence. You made a mistake, Rachel. You assumed I was playing the same game as you. You are playing for money. I am playing for their lives. And unlike you, I have the resources to burn you to the ground. Rachel looked at me with pure, unadulterated fear. For the first time she saw me, not as her father, not as a victim, but as a threat. A massive, insurmountable threat. You can't prove anything, she whispered, her voice trembling. I smiled a cold, shark-like grin that I had learned from Fletcher. Keep telling yourself that, honey. But I suggest you tell Brody that his $50,000 offer was an insult. If you want to buy me off, you are going to need a lot more zeros. Or better yet, save your money for your legal defense. You are going to need it. I unlocked the truck door and climbed in, slamming it shut before she could say another word. I started the engine, the headlights flooding the dark corner of the parking lot, illuminating Rachel's pale, terrified face. She looked small, defeated. I backed out of the spot and drove away, leaving her standing there in the exhaust fumes. My hands were steady on the wheel. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. She had shown her hand. She had named her price. And in doing so, she had given me the final piece of ammunition I needed. She wasn't a mother fighting for her kids. She was a broker fighting for a commission. And I was about to cancel the deal. The silence that followed my confrontation with Rachel in the grocery store parking lot was short-lived. It was the calm before a hurricane, the drop in pressure before the roof gets torn off. I sat in my darkened living room, the blinds drawn tight, nursing a glass of tap water and staring at the grandfather clock. Every tick felt like a countdown. I knew they would retaliate. Rachel's fear in the parking lot had been real, but fear makes wild animals dangerous. It makes them bite. I just didn't know when the teeth would sink in. It happened at 9 o'clock. A soft, almost polite knock at the front door. Not the pounding of the SWAT team, nor the frantic banging of reporters. It was a rhythmic, confident rap. I walked to the door, checking the peephole. Brody. He was standing on my porch under the yellow buzz of the bug light. He wasn't wearing his usual slick suit. He was dressed down in a cashmere sweater and dark jeans, trying to look approachable, trying to look like a concerned family member. He held his hands up in a gesture of surrender, palms open. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door a crack, keeping the chain fastened. The cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain and Brody's expensive cologne. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice grating like gravel. "We need to talk, Wallace," Brody said, his voice smooth, reasonable. "Rachel told me about your conversation. She is hysterical. I thought maybe us men could settle this. You know, without the theatrics." He smiled, a tight, practiced expression that didn't reach his shark-like eyes. "I have nothing to say to you," I replied, moving to close the door. "I know about the envelope," Brody said quickly, jamming his polished loafer into the gap. I stopped. Rachel must have told him. She must have panicked and spilled everything about the $100,000, about the contract, about the video. "I assumed you did," I said. "That is why you are here, to negotiate a surrender." Brody chuckled softly. "Surrender? No, Wallace. I am here to mitigate damage. Rachel is emotional. She makes bad decisions. But I am a businessman. I look at the balance sheet. And right now you are a liability." He leaned in closer to the crack in the door, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I know you figured out the Hawthorne connection. Very clever. Most guys in your position would have just taken the 50 grand and bought a boat. But you had to go digging." He shook his head, feigning disappointment. "Here is the thing, Wallace. You think knowing about the trust fund gives you leverage. It doesn't. It just paints a target on your back. You are standing between me and $15 million. Do you have any idea what people do for that kind of money? They start wars. They topple governments. Getting rid of one old carpenter is a line item in the budget." "Are you threatening me?" I asked, my hand tightening on the door. Brody laughed again. "Threatening? No. I am informing you. I am telling you that you are obsolete. You are fighting a war with sticks and stones, and I have drone strikes. I came here to offer you one last chance. Walk away. Drop the envelope in a trash can. Let us take the kids. If you do, I will make sure you don't die in prison. I might even let you send them a birthday card once a year." I looked at this man, this parasite, who saw my grandchildren as nothing more than a bank transaction. "Get off my porch, Brody," I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. "If you ever come near those kids again, I will break you." Brody's smile vanished. His face went flat and cold. "You had your chance, old man. Now we do it the hard way." He took a step back, pulling his foot from the door jamb. I went to slam the door, but he shouted, his voice suddenly loud, theatrical, pitched for the neighbors to hear. "Please, Wallace. I just want to see the children. I just want peace. Why are you so angry?" I froze. He was acting. He was performing for an audience I couldn't see. "Brody, what are you doing?" I hissed. "Help! Someone help! He is crazy!" Brody screamed, flailing his arms. Then he did something that made my blood run cold. He turned and grabbed the wrought iron railing of my porch. With a sickening crunch, he slammed his own forehead against the metal post. He did it with force, with precision. He staggered back, blood instantly gushing from a gash above his eyebrow, blinding him in one eye. It poured down his face, soaking his expensive cashmere sweater. He looked at me, and through the mask of blood he winked. "Why did you hit me?" Brody shrieked, stumbling backward onto the lawn, falling to his knees. "Oh God, he has a weapon! He is going to kill me!" Neighbors' lights flickered on. Mrs. Higgins across the street opened her door. I stood in my doorway, paralyzed. My hands were empty. I hadn't touched him. I hadn't even stepped onto the porch. "Brody, stop it!" I yelled, realizing too late that I was playing right into his script. He ripped his own shirt, tearing the collar. He smeared the blood from his forehead onto his cheeks, making himself look like the victim of a brutal assault. He crawled across the grass toward the street, wailing, "Help me, please. He is insane." Sirens wailed in the distance. They were close, too close. He must have called them before he even knocked on my door. It was a trap, a perfect, bloody trap. Sheriff Miller's cruiser skidded to a halt in front of the house, followed by an ambulance. Deputies swarmed, the lawn guns drawn. "Drop it, Wallace!" "Hands in the air," Miller shouted, using the megaphone. "I don't have anything," I screamed back, raising my empty hands. He hit himself. "He is lying." Brody was on the ground, pointing a trembling, bloody finger at me. "He hit me with a bat." Brody sobbed to the deputies rushing to his aid. He said he was going to kill the kids, and then he attacked me. I just wanted to talk. The deputies stormed the porch. I was spun around, slammed against the siding of my own house. The impact knocked the wind out of me. I didn't touch him, I gasped, as the cuffs clicked shut for the second time in 3 days. "Check his hands. Check mine. There is no blood on me." "Shut up, Wallace," a deputy spat, tightening the cuffs until they pinched a nerve. "You are done." I watched from the back of the cruiser as the paramedics loaded Brody into the ambulance. He lay on the stretcher, a bandage wrapped around his head, looking frail and victimized. As they lifted him, he turned his head slightly toward the car. He didn't smile this time. He just stared at me with dead, shark eyes. He had sacrificed his own flesh to bury me. 2 hours later, I was standing in front of a night court judge, a man who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Fletcher was there, looking disheveled and furious. But even he couldn't stop the avalanche. "Your Honor, this man is violent and unstable," the prosecutor argued, waving photos of Brody's bloodied face. "He attacked a man who came to offer a truce. He is a danger to the community, and most importantly, a danger to the children involved in the pending custody case." Fletcher objected. "It is a setup, Your Honor. My client has no history of violence. The alleged victim has a financial motive to remove my client from the equation." The judge looked at the photos. He looked at me. He saw a 68-year-old man who looked angry, tired, and desperate. "Mr. Bennett," the judge said, his voice stern, "given the severity of the allegations and the pending nature of the custody hearing, I am issuing an emergency protective order." "No," I whispered. "You are to have no contact with Brody Rachel or the minor children, Leo Mia and Noah Bennett. You must stay at least 500 yards away from them at all times. This includes their current residence at the shelter, their school, and any medical facilities. Any violation of this order will result in the immediate revocation of your bail, and you will await trial in county jail. Do you understand? But the hearing, I stammered. The custody hearing is in 2 days. You can attend the hearing, the judge said, but you will not approach the children. You will not speak to them. You are completely isolated from them until this assault charge is adjudicated. The gavel banged down, sounding like the final nail in a coffin. I walked out of the courthouse into the rain. Fletcher was beside me, swearing under his breath. He baited me, Fletcher, I said, my voice hollow. He smashed his own head open just to keep me away from them. He knows we are close, Fletcher said, his face grim. He knows we have the envelope. He knows we have the financial records. This was a desperation move. But it worked. It worked, I agreed. I can't see them. I can't tell them I am innocent. I can't warn them. We can't warn them, Fletcher corrected. But we can still save them. This changes the strategy, Wallace. How? If he is willing to hurt himself to frame you, he is willing to do anything. We can't just rely on the past anymore. We need to prove he is a fraud now. We need to prove that injury was self-inflicted. How do we do that? I asked, looking at the wet pavement. It was his word against mine. Fletcher stopped walking. He looked up at the streetlights, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. Did you say Mrs. Higgins came out? Yeah, I said. She came out right after he screamed. Mrs. Higgins hates you right now, Fletcher said. She thinks you are a kidnapper. She spit on the ground when I drove by, I confirmed. Good, Fletcher said. That means she was watching. She was watching your house like a hawk, hoping to catch you doing something wrong. He pulled out his phone. Mrs. Higgins has a Ring doorbell camera, Wallace. I saw it when we drove past. It points directly across the street, directly at your front porch. I felt a spark of hope, hot and bright. If she has the footage, Fletcher said, dialing a number. It shows Brody smashing his own face into the railing while you were standing inside the house. But she won't give it to us, I said, the hope faltering. She thinks I am a monster. She won't give it to, Fletcher agreed. But subpoenas aren't requests. They are orders. He put the phone to his ear. Mercer, wake up. I need you to draft a subpoena for a doorbell camera at 404 Maple Drive. I need it served by 6 a.m. We are going fishing. I looked back at the courthouse. They thought they had cut me off. They thought by physically separating me from the kids, they had broken my will. They didn't understand. Distance didn't matter. Walls didn't matter. Brody had played his dirtiest card. He had spilled his own blood to win, but in doing so, he had stepped into the view of the one witness who wanted to see me fail. And that irony, that beautiful, twisted irony, might just be the thing that saves us all. I am not going home, Fletcher, I said. Take me to your office. We are pulling an all-nighter. Fletcher nodded. Get in the car, Wallace. The bleeding stops now. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung open, and the noise of the hallway spilled in like a physical wave. It was a low, angry hum, the sound of a mob that had already made up its mind. I sat at the defense table, my back stiff against the wooden chair, feeling the eyes of strangers boring into my skull. To them, I was not a grandfather. I was a caricature, a villain ripped from the headlines, the lonely old man who stole children to fill the silence of his empty house. Fletcher sat beside me, arranging his papers with the slow, deliberate movements of a man defusing a bomb. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at the judge. He was focused entirely on the empty space where the prosecution would sit. Then they entered. If I hadn't known her for 35 years, I would not have recognized my own daughter. Rachel walked in, but the glamorous, sharp-edged woman from the press conference was gone. In her place was a ghost. She wore a shapeless beige cardigan, that swallowed her frame, a simple white blouse buttoned to her chin, and a skirt that fell well below her knees. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, leaving her skin looking pale and translucent. She had even forgone the hair dye, letting a few strands of gray show at her temples. She walked with a slight stoop, clutching a tissue in one hand and Brody's arm with the other. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She was projecting fragility. She was the victim incarnate, a mother broken by a decade of separation. Brody, wearing a neck brace to sell the lie of my assault, guided her to the plaintiff's table with a tenderness that made my stomach churn. He pulled out her chair, whispered something in her ear, and patted her hand. He was playing the role of the supportive partner, the rock in her storm. The judge, the Honorable Margaret Sterling, entered the room. She was known for being tough on domestic cases, a woman who valued order and the sanctity of the nuclear family. She looked at Rachel with immediate, unguarded sympathy. Then she looked at me. Her gaze hardened into something cold and clinical. I was already guilty in her eyes. I was the disruption. Mr. Fairchild, Rachel's high-priced attorney, stood up for his opening statement. He was a man who moved like oil, smooth and slick. He didn't stand behind the podium. He walked right up to the jury box, his voice low and intimate, as if he were sharing a secret. "Ladies and gentlemen," Fairchild began, gesturing vaguely toward me without making eye contact. "We are here today to correct a tragedy that has lasted for 3,650 days. He paused for effect, letting the number sink in. "You will hear stories today about abandonment. You will hear the defense try to paint Ms. Bennett as a woman who didn't care. But I ask you to look at her. Look at a mother who has spent every single day of the last 10 years wondering if her babies were warm, if they were fed, if they even remembered her name." Rachel let out a soft, stifled sob. It was perfect. A little too perfect. "This is not a complicated case," Fairchild continued, his voice rising slightly. "It is a story as old as time. A controlling father, a widower unable to process his own grief, who decided that his daughter was not good enough. A man who used his physical strength and his psychological dominance to tear a family apart. He didn't just take these children. He banished their mother. He threatened her life. He erased her from existence." I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. The narrative was shifting. I wasn't just a kidnapper anymore. I was an abuser, a tyrant. Fairchild turned and pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. "We will prove that Wallace Bennett is not a savior. He is a jailer. And today we are asking you to give these children the key to their freedom." He sat down. The gallery erupted in a low murmur of agreement. I heard the word "monster" whispered more than once. Fletcher didn't flinch. He simply leaned over and whispered, "Let them pile it on. The higher the tower of lies, the harder it falls." Rachel took the stand first. She told a story that was heartbreaking, compelling, and entirely fabricated. She talked about going to the store for medicine for Noah. She described coming back to find the locks changed. She described pounding on the door, screaming for her children, only to see me in the window laughing. "Why didn't you call the police?" Fairchild asked gently. Rachel looked down at her hands, twisting the tissue. "I was scared. He told me he had connections. He said if I called the cops, he would tell them I was on drugs. He said he would make sure I never saw them again. I was young. I was alone. I didn't know what to do." It was a brilliant defense for her absence. It turned her negligence into victimization. But the real blow came next. The prosecution calls Kelly Vance to the stand. I frowned. The name was familiar, but I couldn't place it. A woman in her late 30s walked in. She was dressed conservatively, but there was a hardness in her eyes, a look of defiance. It was Rachel's old friend from high school. The one she used to skip class with. The one who had helped her sneak out of the house. I hadn't seen her in 15 years. Kelly swore on the Bible and sat down. She looked at Rachel and gave her a small, encouraging nod. Ms. Vance Fairchild said. Were you present at the Bennett residence on the afternoon of October 14th, 10 years ago? Yes, I was. Kelly said, her voice clear and strong. Can you tell the court what you saw? Kelly took a deep breath. She looked directly at me, her eyes narrowing. I drove Rachel there. She wanted to pick up the kids. She had left them for an hour to get a prescription filled. When we pulled up, the house was dark. Rachel got out and ran to the door. She was banging on it, crying. And then what happened? Fairchild pressed. Then the door opened, Kelly said, and he came out. She pointed at me. Mr. Bennett came out onto the porch. He was screaming. He called her names I can't repeat here. And then he went back inside and came out with a shotgun. The courtroom gasped. A collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. A shotgun. I whispered, stunned. I didn't even own a gun. I hated them. He pointed it right at Rachel's head. Kelly continued, her voice trembling with feigned emotion. He racked the slide. I heard it click. He said, If you don't get off my property in 5 seconds, I will paint the porch with your brains. Liar, Leo shouted from the back of the courtroom. The outburst was sudden and explosive. My grandson was standing up, his face red with fury. He shouted it again, his voice cracking. Liar! My grandpa doesn't have a gun. He hates guns. Order! Order in the court! Judge Sterling banged her gavel, her face flushed with anger. Bailiff, control that child! 2 officers grabbed Leo by the arms. He struggled, looking at me with desperate eyes. Tell them, Grandpa. Tell them it is a lie. Sit down, young man, or you will be removed, the judge barked. Leo was forced back into his seat, shaking with rage. Brody turned in his seat and smirked at him, a tiny, almost imperceptible gesture that made my blood boil. Kelly Vance continued her testimony unfazed. We ran. We were terrified. We drove away and didn't stop until we were 2 towns over. Rachel wanted to go to the police, but I told her not to. I told her a man crazy enough to pull a shotgun on his own daughter was crazy enough to use it on the kids if the cops showed up. We stayed away to keep them safe. It was the final nail. It explained everything. It explained why she left. It explained why she didn't call for help. It painted me as a violent, unhinged lunatic, holding 3 children hostage at gunpoint. The gallery was in an uproar. People were glaring at me with pure hatred. I could hear the whispers. He should be under the jail. Someone needs to take him out. Those poor babies. I looked at the jury. They were horrified. A young woman in the front row was wiping tears from her eyes. An older man was shaking his head, his lips pressed into a thin line of disgust. They believed her. Why wouldn't they? A witness. A corroborating story. A motive. It was airtight. Fletcher leaned over to me. She is good, he whispered. She rehearsed that. She knows exactly what details to add. The racking of the slide. The specific threat. It sells the fear. Can we disprove it? I asked, feeling the walls closing in. We can prove you didn't own a registered firearm, Fletcher said. But that doesn't prove you didn't have an illegal one. It is, he said, she said. And right now she has a witness and you have a reputation for being a kidnapper. I looked at Rachel. She was still weeping softly into her tissue, her shoulders shaking. But under the table I saw her foot tapping, a rhythmic, impatient tap. She wasn't sad. She was waiting for the applause. Fairchild finished his examination. Thank you, Ms. Vance. Your bravery in coming forward today has shed light on a decade of darkness. He sat down, looking triumphant. He thought the game was over. He thought he had buried me under a mountain of perjury so high I would never climb out. Judge Sterling looked at Fletcher. Does the defense wish to cross-examine? Fletcher stood up slowly. He buttoned his jacket. He didn't look worried. He looked like a man who was about to pull the tablecloth out from under a fully set dinner table. "Yes, Your Honor," Fletcher said. "We have a few questions." He walked to the podium carrying nothing but a single sealed manila envelope. He placed it on the stand in front of him. He didn't open it. He just let it sit there, an ominous brown rectangle in a sea of wood and fabric. Ms. Vance Fletcher began, his voice pleasant, almost chatty. "You say you drove Rachel to the house that day. What kind of car were you driving?" A Honda Civic," Kelly said, blinking. "Blue." "A blue Honda Civic," Fletcher repeated. "And you say it was raining," pouring, Kelly said confidently. "And you saw Mr. Bennett clearly on the porch, even through the rain, even though it was dark." "The porch light was on," Kelly shot back. "I saw him. I saw his face. I saw the gun." Fletcher nodded. He picked up the envelope. He tapped it against his palm. "And you are certain, absolutely certain, that Rachel was with you? That she was crying? That she was desperate to get her children?" "I am under oath," Kelly snapped. "Of course I am certain." Fletcher smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Interesting," he said. "Because Rachel testified earlier that she walked to the house. She said she didn't have a car. She said she walked 3 miles in the rain to get medicine." Kelly froze. Her eyes darted to Rachel. Rachel's head snapped up, her mask of grief slipping for a fraction of a second. I picked her up," Kelly stammered. "On the way. She was walking and I saw her and I picked her up." Fletcher didn't let up. So you picked her up, and then you drove her to the house. And then the gun incident happened." "Yes." "Exactly." Fletcher ripped the seal on the envelope. The sound was loud in the quiet courtroom. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Ms. Vance, this is a receipt from the King County impound lot. Dated October 14th, 10 years ago. It shows that a blue Honda Civic registered to a Kelly Vance was towed from a no-parking zone in downtown Seattle at 2 p.m. It wasn't released until the following morning." He walked up to the witness stand and placed the paper in front of her. "So unless you have a flying car, Ms. Vance, or unless you are lying to this court to help your friend secure a multi-million-dollar payday, I am struggling to understand how you drove to Mr. Bennett's house at 6 p.m. in a car that was locked behind a chain-link fence 20 miles away." The courtroom went silent. Dead silent. Kelly looked at the paper. Her mouth opened and closed. She looked at Rachel. Rachel wasn't crying anymore. She was staring at Kelly with a look of pure, unadulterated venom. I might have the dates wrong," Kelly whispered. Fletcher leaned in close. "Perjury is a felony, Ms. Vance. We have the tow truck driver on our witness list. We have the logbook. Do you want to try again? Did you see a gun? Or did Rachel tell you to say you saw a gun?" Kelly crumbled. She shrank into the witness chair, bursting into real tears this time. "She told me to say it," she sobbed. "She said he was a monster. She said she needed help getting her kids back. I didn't know. I didn't know about the money." The gallery erupted. The outrage that had been directed at me shifted instantly, a tide turning violent. The judge banged her gavel, shouting for order, but the damage was done. The lie had cracked, and through the fissure, the truth was starting to bleed out. Fletcher turned back to the defense table and winked at me. "Your witness, Mr. Fairchild." Fairchild looked like he wanted to vomit. He waved a hand, dismissing the witness without a word. As Kelly Vance fled the courtroom sobbing into her hands, I looked at Rachel. She was pale. She was shaking. But she wasn't done. I could see it in her eyes. She was cornered, but cornered animals fight the hardest. Fletcher sat down next to me. "That was the jab," he whispered. "Now get ready for the uppercut." I touched the breast pocket of my jacket. I could feel the outline of the second envelope. The real one. the one with the wax seal. "I am ready," I said. "Let's finish this." Mr. Fairchild rose from his seat, his face slick with sweat, but his eyes burning with the desperation of a gambler doubling down on a losing hand. He had just watched his star witness implode, but he was not a man who surrendered easily. He knew that facts could be disputed, but emotion was a weapon that left no fingerprints. He smoothed his tie, cleared his throat, and called the only person left who could salvage his case. "I call Rachel Bennett to the stand." Rachel stood up. The transformation was instant and terrifying to behold. In the hallway just hours ago, she had been a predator, eyes sharp and calculating. Now she was a wounded bird. She walked to the witness stand with small, hesitant steps, her hand trembling as she placed it on the Bible. She did not look at the jury. She did not look at me. She kept her eyes fixed on her lap, her shoulders hunched, as if she were expecting a blow. Judge Sterling watched her with an intensity that made my stomach knot. I knew the judge's reputation. She was a fierce advocate for women who had been silenced, for victims of domestic tyranny. She looked at Rachel, and she did not see a con artist. She saw a reflection of every battered woman who had ever stood in her courtroom. Fairchild approached the stand, his voice dropping to a gentle, soothing register. "Rachel, I know this is difficult. I know you are terrified. But you need to tell this court what happened on the night of October 14th, 10 years ago." Rachel took a shuddering breath. She reached for the glass of water on the stand, her hand shaking so violently that water sloshed over the rim. She took a tiny sip and then looked up, her eyes swimming with tears that seemed to summon themselves on command. "It was raining," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The court reporter had to lean in to hear her. Noah was sick. He was burning up with a fever. He was only 1 year old. I didn't have any money for a doctor. I didn't have a car. I just had my babies. She paused, wiping a tear from her cheek with the back of her hand, a gesture so childish and vulnerable it made my heart ache with a strange mix of pity and fury. "I told my dad I needed to go to the pharmacy," she continued. "I told him I would be back in an hour. I just needed infant Tylenol. I walked. It was 3 miles in the rain, but I didn't care. I would have walked through fire for my son." I gripped the edge of the defense table. I remembered that night vividly. I remembered the smell of burnt plastic and stale alcohol on her breath. I remembered her demanding cash not for medicine but for her dealer. But as she spoke, I saw the jury leaning in, captivated by her performance. She was rewriting history in real time, painting a masterpiece of martyrdom. "And when you came back?" Fairchild asked softly. Rachel let out a sob that sounded like it was ripped from her soul. "The lights were off," she choked out. "The door was locked. I used my key, but it wouldn't turn. He had changed the cylinders. In 1 hour he had changed the locks. I pounded on the door. I screamed for my babies. I could hear Mia crying inside. I could hear her calling for me." She looked directly at Judge Sterling, her eyes pleading for validation. Then the window opened. My father was there. He had a shotgun. He pointed it right at my face. He told me that if I didn't leave, he would bury me in the backyard. He said I was unfit. He said I was garbage. He said if I ever tried to come back, he would kill the children to keep them from me. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. I looked at Fletcher, his face grim. We had disproven Kelly's testimony, but Rachel was clever. She was making herself the sole witness to the threat, removing the need for corroboration. She was claiming it happened when she was alone, vulnerable, and terrified. "Why didn't you go to the police?" Fairchild asked the question that had been hanging over the trial. Rachel looked down at her hands, twisting a shredded tissue. "I was 25 years old," she whispered. "I was a single mother with no job, no money, and no support. My father was a powerful man in our community. He knew everyone. He told me the sheriff was his friend. He told me that if I went to the police, he would tell them I was a junkie. He said he would plant drugs on me. He said he would make sure I went to prison and never saw my kids again. She looked up, tears streaming freely now, washing away the last vestiges of the woman who had tried to extort me in the parking lot. I was weak, she sobbed. I was a weak single mother and I couldn't fight him. I was afraid that if I pushed him, he would hurt them. So I ran. I ran to protect them. I thought if I stayed away, he would let them live. Fairchild let the silence stretch, letting the weight of her words settle over the room like a heavy blanket. He walked back to his table and picked up a photograph of the children. "And the last 10 years?" he asked. "Describe the last 10 years for us, Rachel." Rachel closed her eyes, tilting her head back as if in physical pain. It was hell, she said, her voice trembling with a raw agony that felt terrifyingly real. Every single day was torture. I woke up wondering if they were eating. I went to sleep wondering if they were warm. I celebrated their birthdays alone in a dark apartment, lighting a candle on a cupcake that no one would eat. I lived in a purgatory of missing them. I worked 3 jobs trying to save enough money to hire a lawyer to fight him. But every time I got close, something happened. I was paralyzed by the fear that he would kill them if I showed my face. She turned to me then, and for the first time she looked me in the eye. But it wasn't the look of hatred I expected. It was a look of profound, terrified accusation. "You stole my life," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You stole their childhoods. You let them think I was dead. How could you? How could a father do that to his own daughter?" The courtroom erupted. The judge banged her gavel, but her heart wasn't in it. She was staring at me, and her eyes were hard, cold chips of flint. I saw the judgment there. I saw the bias. To her, I was the patriarch, the oppressor, the man who had used his power to crush a vulnerable woman. She looked at Rachel and saw a survivor. She looked at me and saw a monster. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. We had facts. We had logic. But Rachel had a story. And in a court of law, sometimes a story is more powerful than the truth. She had taken her negligence and turned it into a sacrifice. She had taken her abandonment and turned it into a forced exile. Fairchild sat down looking solemn and victorious. He knew he had just delivered a knockout punch. The jury was glaring at me. The women in the gallery were weeping. Even the bailiff looked at me with disgust. Judge Sterling cleared her throat. Her voice was icy when she spoke. "Mr. Fletcher, cross-examination." Fletcher stood up slowly. He didn't rush. He didn't look rattled. He buttoned his suit jacket and walked to the podium carrying nothing but that single heavy manila envelope. He placed it on the stand with a deliberate thud. He looked at Rachel, who was still dabbing at her eyes, her chest heaving with theatrical sobs. "Ms. Bennett Fletcher," began his voice, flat and unimpressed. "That was a very moving story. Truly, it explains so much. The fear, the flight, the silence." Rachel sniffed, looking at him warily. "It is the truth," she whispered. Fletcher nodded. "Of course. You claim you went to buy medicine. You claim you were locked out. You claim you were threatened with death. And you claim that for 10 years you were a destitute mother scraping by, trying to save money to rescue your children." "Yes," Rachel said, her chin trembling. "Every penny I made, I saved for them." Fletcher tapped the envelope. "So you testify under oath that you had no resources, that you left that night with nothing but the clothes on your back." Rachel hesitated for a fraction of a second. Her eyes flicked to Brody, who was sitting rigid at the plaintiff's table. "I had nothing," she confirmed. "Just my love for them." Fletcher smiled. It was a terrifying smile. A smile that said he knew where the bodies were buried because he had brought the shovel. "Interesting," he said. "Because my client remembers that night differently. He remembers you weren't asking for medicine. He remembers you were asking for a buyout." Rachel's face went pale. The tears stopped instantly. "That is a lie," she snapped, the venom leaking back into her voice. "Is it?" Fletcher asked. He ripped the wax seal off the envelope. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. He reached inside and pulled out a stack of documents. He held up the first one, a yellowed piece of paper with a notary stamp at the bottom. "This," Fletcher said, his voice rising so everyone could hear, "is a relinquishment of parental rights form. Dated October 14th, 10 years ago. It is signed by you, Rachel Bennett. It is notarized. And it states clearly that you voluntarily surrender all custody and rights to Leo Maya and Noah Bennett." Rachel stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "He forged it," she screamed. "He made me sign it. He held a gun to my head." Fletcher didn't blink. He reached into the envelope again. "Ah, yes, the gun," Fletcher said. "The gun that Ms. Vance didn't see because she wasn't there. But let's talk about the coercion, Ms. Bennett. You say you were forced. You say you left with nothing." He pulled out a rectangular slip of paper. It was a copy of a cashed check. "Then, can you explain this?" Fletcher asked, walking toward the witness stand. "This is a cashier's check from my client's savings account, made out to Rachel Bennett, dated October 14th, 10 years ago." He slammed the check onto the ledge in front of her for $100,000. The courtroom gasped again, but this time the sound was different. It was the sound of shock of a narrative shattering. Rachel looked at the check. Her hands started to shake uncontrollably. I, she stammered. "And this check," Fletcher continued relentless, "was cashed 3 days later. Not in Seattle, not at a pharmacy, but at the cashier's cage of the Bellagio Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas." He pulled out another document. "We have the transaction record, Ms. Bennett. We have the hotel receipt. You didn't run away to hide. You ran away to party. You spent 10 years living the high life while my client raised your children on a pension because you drained his savings to buy your freedom." The judge's eyes widened. She leaned forward, looking from Fletcher to Rachel. The sympathy in her gaze was evaporating, replaced by a dawning horror. "But wait," Fletcher said, holding up a hand. "We aren't done. Because you said my client threatened you. You said you were terrified. You said you were a victim." He reached into the envelope one last time. He pulled out a small silver USB drive. "My client is a meticulous man," Fletcher said, turning to the jury. "He knew that a drug addict's word is unreliable. He knew that one day you might come back with a story just like this. So he did what any prudent man would do. He recorded the transaction." Rachel let out a sound that was half scream, half animalistic growl. She lunged for the USB drive, her fingers clawing at the air, but the bailiff stepped in, blocking her path. "No," she shrieked. "You can't show that. It is private. It is illegal. It is evidence," Fletcher roared, his voice thundering through the courtroom. "Your Honor," Fletcher said, turning to Judge Sterling, "I ask for permission to play this video. I ask the court to see exactly how much this mother missed her children." Judge Sterling looked at Rachel, who was now hyperventilating, clutching the railing of the witness stand. Then she looked at me. Her expression had changed. The disgust was gone. In its place was a question, a realization that she had been played. "Permission granted," the judge said, her voice cold as ice. Fletcher plugged the drive into the court's AV system. The large screens on the wall flickered to life, and in high definition, the ghost of 10 years ago appeared to seal Rachel's fate. The courtroom was a pressure cooker, and Mr. Fairchild was turning up the heat. He stood in the center of the floor, his face flushed with the exertion of his performance, pointing an accusatory finger directly at my chest. He had recovered from the shock of the check faster than I anticipated. He was spinning it, twisting the truth until it looked like a lie. He argued that the check was not a payment, but a coerced extortion, that I had forced a vulnerable, terrified mother to sign away her rights under duress. and that the video Fletcher wanted to play was nothing more than the recording of a hostage situation. "Your Honor," Fairchild bellowed, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. "This man is not a savior. He is a manipulator of the highest order. He used his financial power to bully a destitute young woman. He stole her children. He stole 10 years of their lives. And now he tries to use the fruits of his coercion to justify his crime." He turned to the jury, his eyes blazing with righteous indignation. "We are asking for the maximum penalty allowed by law. We are asking for the immediate and permanent revocation of all custody and visitation rights. We are asking that Wallace Bennett be remanded to custody immediately to await sentencing. For the crime of kidnapping in the first degree, for the crime of custodial interference, and for the emotional abuse of these 3 innocent children, the state recommends a sentence of 20 years in a federal penitentiary." 20 years. The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. I looked at the jury. They looked confused, torn between Rachel's tearful testimony and the hard evidence of the check. But Fairchild was good. He was painting a picture of a power dynamic where I was the villain and Rachel was the helpless victim. He was making them doubt their own eyes. I looked at Rachel. She was hunched over at the plaintiff's table, her face buried in her hands, shaking with silent sobs. But I knew she was listening. I knew she was calculating the odds. If I went to prison, she won. If I went to prison, she got the trust fund. If I went to prison, my grandchildren would be shipped off to a boarding school in Europe, while she and Brody lived in a mansion paid for by their trauma. And then the silence shattered. It did not come from the judge. It did not come from the lawyers. It came from the back of the courtroom where my heart was sitting. "Stop it," Leo screamed. I turned around. My 15-year-old grandson had leaped to his feet. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He was shaking not with fear, but with the fury of a boy who has been pushed too far. He looked at Rachel, his eyes burning with a hatred that no child should ever have to feel for a parent. "Stop lying," Leo shouted, his voice cracking. "You didn't leave because you were scared. You left because you wanted the money. I remember." The courtroom erupted into chaos. The judge banged her gavel demanding order. But Leo was not done. He stepped into the aisle, his fists clenched at his sides. "I was 5 years old," he yelled, pointing at his mother. "I remember the rain. I remember you yelling at Grandpa. You didn't ask for medicine. You asked for cash. You told him you hated us. You told him we were mistakes." "Leo, sit down," the bailiff barked, moving toward him. "No!" Leo screamed, fighting the tears that were streaming down his face. "I will not sit down. She sold us. She sold us for a check, and now she wants to sell us again for a trust fund. She does not love us. She loves the money." Rachel turned around, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. She hadn't expected this. She thought she had broken him. She thought the script Brody gave them was enough to silence the truth. "Leo, baby, please," she sobbed, reaching out a hand. "Mommy loves you. He brainwashed you." "Don't touch me," Leo recoiled as if she were made of fire. "You are not my mother. You are just a lady who left. Grandpa is the only one who stayed. Grandpa is the only one who cares." The bailiff grabbed Leo by the arm, pulling him back. Leo struggled, kicking at the bench, his shouts turning into guttural sobs of frustration. "Let him go!" I roared, standing up, my chair clattering backward. "Don't you touch him! Sit down!" "Mr. Bennett," the judge ordered, her voice sharp as a razor. "One more outburst and I will hold you both in contempt." I watched helplessly as the bailiff forced my grandson back into his seat, standing over him like a prison guard. Leo slumped forward, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders heaving. Mia and Noah were clinging to him, terrified, crying silently. My heart broke. It shattered into a million pieces right there in that courtroom. They were hurting my kids. They were destroying them in front of my eyes, and the law was helping them do it. I looked across the aisle. Brody was watching the scene unfold. He wasn't looking at Rachel. He wasn't looking at the judge. He was looking at me. And he smiled. It was a small smirk, a tightening of the lips that lasted only a second, but it told me everything. He was enjoying this. He liked the chaos. He liked the pain. To him, this was just leverage. The more traumatized the kids appeared, the more unstable the situation looked, the more likely the judge was to grant custody to the mother. He thought he had checkmated me. He thought the sight of my grandson breaking down would force me to plead out, to surrender, to make it stop. He thought I was weak. Something inside me shifted. The fear evaporated. The hesitation vanished. I looked at Brody's smug face and I felt a cold calm settle over me. It was the same calm I felt when I stood on top of a suspension bridge in a gale-force wind, calculating the load-bearing capacity of a steel cable. I knew exactly how much pressure it would take to snap him. I looked at Fletcher. The old lawyer was pale, shaken by Leo's outburst. He looked at me, his eyes asking what to do. I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. I stood up slowly. I buttoned my jacket. I smoothed my tie. I did not look like a man facing 20 years in prison. I looked like a man who was about to foreclose on a bad debt. "Mr. Bennett, sit down," the judge warned. I ignored her. I walked around the defense table, my steps heavy and deliberate on the hardwood floor. I walked until I was standing in the center of the well, directly in front of the judge's bench. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. The bailiff reached for his weapon, his hand hovering over his holster. "Don't move," he commanded. I moved slowly, deliberately. I pulled out the original brown envelope, the one with the broken wax seal, the one Fletcher had taken the copies from. But inside this envelope was something else, something Fletcher hadn't used yet, something I had kept for the very end. I held the envelope up my hand, steady as a rock. "Your Honor," I said, my voice low but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "Mr. Fairchild says I stole 10 years. He says I am a kidnapper. He says I deserve 20 years in a cage." I turned to look at Rachel. She was staring at the envelope, her eyes locked on it like a deer in headlights. She knew the check was real. She knew the contract was real. But she didn't know what else was in there. "But before you sentence me," I continued, turning back to the judge, "I think you should see the rest of the transaction. You saw the check. You saw the contract. But you didn't see the guarantee." "Guarantee?" Judge Sterling asked, frowning, her gavel hovering in the air. "Rachel demanded a guarantee," I said. "She said she wouldn't sign the papers unless I promised never to come after her for child support. She said she needed a clean break. So we made a deal. And I recorded that deal not just on audio, but on video. I walked over to the AV cart where Fletcher had plugged in the USB drive. The screen was black, waiting. "Mr. Fairchild says my grandson is brainwashed," I said, my voice rising. "He says my daughter is a victim. Well, let's let Rachel speak for herself. Let's let her tell you exactly what she thinks of her children." Brody stood up, his chair screeching. "Objection!" "Your Honor," he shouted, forgetting he wasn't the lawyer. "This is inadmissible. This is a private family matter. Sit down." "Mr. Brody," the judge snapped, her eyes fixed on me. "Mr. Bennett, play the video." I pressed the spacebar on the laptop. The large screens on the wall flickered to life. The image was grainy, time-stamped 10 years ago. It showed my living room. It showed the rain lashing against the window. And it showed Rachel. She looked young, ravaged by drugs, her eyes wild and manic. She was holding a stack of cash in one hand and a lit cigarette in the other. She wasn't crying. She wasn't scared. She was laughing. It was a sound that chilled the entire courtroom, a harsh, cackling laugh that had no warmth in it. I looked at the real Rachel sitting at the plaintiff's table. She had stopped breathing. Her face was the color of old ash. She knew what was coming. She knew the words she had spoken that night, words that would echo through history and seal her fate. I looked at Leo. He was watching the screen, his tears forgotten, his eyes wide. I looked at Brody. The smirk was gone. In its place was the look of a man who realizes he is standing on a trapdoor and the lever has just been pulled. I stepped back and let the ghosts speak. The video on the screen froze on a frame of Rachel's face, mid-laugh, cigarette smoke curling around her head like a halo of vice. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, a vacuum, where the air had been sucked out by the sheer weight of the revelation. I did not look at the screen. I looked at the judge. Judge Sterling was staring at the frozen image, her mouth slightly open, the color draining from her cheeks. The narrative of the poor victimized mother had just collided with the reality of a callous transaction, and the impact was catastrophic. I stepped closer to the bench, placing my hands on the polished wood. My voice was steady, devoid of the anger I had carried for a decade. Now there was only the cold, hard clarity of the truth. "Your Honor," I said, breaking the silence. "My daughter testified under oath that she walked 3 miles in the rain to buy infant Tylenol for a sick child. She testified that she was a desperate mother willing to do anything to save her baby." I paused, turning my head slightly to look at Rachel. She was frozen at the plaintiff's table, her eyes wide and glassy, staring at the envelope in the judge's hand as if it were a bomb counting down to 0. But I am afraid the price of fever reducers 10 years ago was significantly higher than she remembers, I continued, turning back to the judge. And interestingly enough, the pharmacy she visited was not in Seattle. It was not down the street. It was at the Bellagio Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. Judge Sterling blinked, her gaze snapping from the screen to me. She looked down at the envelope I had placed on her bench. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as she reached for it. "Open it," I urged softly. "Please." The sound of the heavy paper tearing seemed to echo like a thunderclap in the quiet room. The judge pulled out the contents. There were only 3 items, but they weighed more than the entire case the prosecution had built. The first was a document on thick legal bond paper. It was yellowed at the edges, smelling faintly of the cedar box where I had kept it hidden. "This, Your Honor, is a contract of relinquishment," I explained as she read it. "It was drafted by a notary public at 3 in the morning. It states in clear, unambiguous language that Rachel Bennett voluntarily, permanently, and irrevocably surrenders all parental rights and custody of Leo, Mia, and Noah Bennett to their grandfather, Wallace Bennett." I pointed to the bottom of the page. "You will see her signature. You will see the notary's stamp. And you will see a thumbprint in red ink." We didn't have an ink pad, so she used lipstick. She wanted it done fast. She was in a hurry. Judge Sterling ran her finger over the thumbprint. She looked up at Rachel, and the look of betrayal in her eyes was terrifying. It was the look of a woman who realizes her compassion has been weaponized against her. Rachel let out a small, strangled whimper. She tried to stand up, but her legs gave out and she slumped back into her chair. Brody pulled away from her, inching his chair to the right, trying to create physical distance between himself and the disaster unfolding next to him. The judge reached into the envelope again. She pulled out the second item, a photocopy of a cashier's check. "And this is the receipt," I said, my voice hardening. $100,000. My life savings. My retirement. The money I had put away for a rainy day. Well, it rained that night, Your Honor. It poured. I walked back toward the defense table, standing next to Leo, who was watching me with awe. "She didn't want medicine," I said to the room. "She wanted a buyout. She told me the kids were baggage. She told me they were ruining her life. She said if I didn't pay her, she would leave them at a fire station. Or worse. So I paid. I paid a ransom for my own grandchildren." Judge Sterling looked at the back of the check copy. "It is endorsed," the judge said, her voice hollow. "Deposited at the casino cage. 2 days after she disappeared," I confirmed. While I was holding a sick baby and trying to explain to a 5-year-old why his mommy wasn't coming back, she was playing blackjack in Nevada. She didn't call. She didn't write. She didn't ask about the fever. She just spent the money. And when the money ran out, she found a new mark. I pointed at Brody. She found him. And together, they waited. They waited for 10 years. Not because they were scared of me, not because I had a gun, but because they were waiting for a bigger payout. Fairchild Rachel's lawyer stood up slowly. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on the deck of the Titanic. He opened his mouth to object, to say something, anything, to stop the bleeding. But no words came out. He looked at the evidence in the judge's hand, then he looked at his client. He sat back down and closed his briefcase. He was done. Judge Sterling set the papers down. She looked at the video screen where the frozen image of Rachel laughed with a stack of cash. Then she looked at the real Rachel, who was now sobbing into her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. But they weren't tears of sorrow. I knew that. The jury knew that. Even Leo knew that. They were tears of a con artist who had been caught holding the ace of spades up her sleeve. "Do you have anything to say, Ms. Bennett?" Judge Sterling asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Rachel looked up. Her makeup was smeared, her face blotchy. The mask of the grieving mother had dissolved, revealing the desperate, greedy stranger underneath. He tricked me," she stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "He took advantage of me. I was high. I didn't know what I was signing. You knew enough to cash the check I shot back. You knew enough to stay away for 10 years until Jeremiah Hawthorne died." The mention of the name Hawthorne acted like a physical blow. Rachel flinched. Brody went rigid. The judge frowned. "Who is Jeremiah Hawthorne?" Judge Sterling asked. "He is the father of the children's father," I said. "A billionaire oil tycoon who died last week. The man whose estate just left a $15 million trust fund to his only living heirs, my grandchildren." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. The jury exchanged stunned glances. The reporters in the back row started typing furiously on their phones. "That is why she is here, Your Honor," I said, delivering the final blow. "She isn't here for custody. She is here for a withdrawal. She is here because she spent the $100,000 I gave her, and now she wants the $15 million they inherited. She is trying to steal their future just like she sold their past." The judge looked at Brody. He was staring straight ahead, a vein throbbing in his temple. He knew it was over. He knew the game was up. "This court has seen enough," Judge Sterling said, standing up. She picked up the envelope and held it like a weapon. "Bailiff, take Ms. Bennett and Mr. Brody into custody immediately." Rachel screamed. It was a high, piercing sound of pure terror. "No, you can't. I am the mother. I have rights. You sold your rights for a stack of chips in Vegas," I said, as the officers moved in. The courtroom erupted into chaos, but for the first time in days, it was a chaos I welcomed. It was the sound of justice finally violently arriving. Fletcher hit play on the laptop, and the massive screens on the courtroom wall flickered with the grainy footage of a rainy night 10 years ago. The image was undeniable. There was Rachel, younger, gaunt, and high-standing in my living room. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging for medicine. She was fanning herself with a thick stack of $100 bills, the ink on the check I had just written barely dry. Her laugh on the video was a jagged, ugly sound that grated against the silence of the room. "Take the brats, old man," the digital ghost sneered, her eyes glazed and wild as she stuffed the cash into her pocket. $100 grand for my freedom. That is a steal." She blew smoke directly at the camera lens, a gesture of pure contempt. "Don't ever look for me. I hate being a mother. It is a prison. Good luck with the diapers and the crying. I am going to Vegas." The video ended with her turning her back on the crib where baby Noah was sleeping and walking out the door without a backward glance. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, as if the entire room had forgotten how to breathe. Then it was broken by a scream that sounded like a wounded animal. Rachel launched herself from the plaintiff's table, her chair clattering to the floor. "No," she shrieked, her face twisted in a rictus of madness. "That is not real. That is a deep fake. You doctored it." She scrambled over the wooden railing, clawing toward the screen as if she could tear the image down with her bare hands. Two bailiffs tackled her before she reached the AV cart, pinning her to the floor as she kicked and spat, cursing me, cursing the judge and cursing her own children. In the chaos, I saw movement near the back exit. Brody. He was slipping out of his chair, crouching low, trying to blend into the stunned crowd. He was abandoning the ship he had steered into the iceberg. But Fletcher was faster. He signaled to the marshal standing by the door. As Brody reached for the handle, a heavy hand clamped onto his shoulder. Fletcher walked over, calm as a summer breeze, and slapped a document onto Brody's chest. "Going somewhere, Mr. Brody. This is a subpoena for wire fraud and conspiracy, and I believe the officers behind you have a warrant for extortion." Brody slumped against the doorframe, his shark eyes finally dull and lifeless as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The gavel banged not to restore order, but to deliver judgment. Judge Sterling stood up, her voice trembling with suppressed rage as she looked down at the woman being restrained on the floor. "Rachel Bennett and Samuel Brody, you are hereby remanded into custody immediately. You are charged with perjury, fraud, extortion, and child abandonment. I am referring this case to the district attorney for maximum prosecution." She took a breath and looked at me, her expression softening into something like awe. "Mr. Bennett, full legal and physical custody is awarded to you effective immediately. You are also named the sole trustee of the Hawthorne estate. Get those children out of here." As the officers dragged Rachel away, screaming obscenities, I didn't look back. I gathered Leo, Mia, and Noah. We walked out of the courthouse, past the stunned cameras, past the silence of the crowd, into the quiet sanctuary of my truck. The drive home was silent. No radio, no talking. Just the rhythmic hum of the tires on the pavement. The storm had finally broken, and the air felt clean for the first time in weeks. We pulled into the driveway. The red paint was still on the siding, but it didn't look like a wound anymore. It looked like a battle scar. Leo broke the silence from the back seat, his voice small and hesitant. "Grandpa, did you really pay $100,000 to buy us?" I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw 3 faces looking back at me, safe, loved, and finally free. I smiled, a true, bone-deep smile that I hadn't felt in a decade. That was the best investment of my life, Leo. I bought peace. I bought 3 angels, and honestly, I got you guys at a bargain price. I learned that family is never defined by DNA or a last name. It is defined by who stays when the rain starts falling. Rachel shared my blood, but she never shared my heart. She taught me that greed can turn a person into a stranger, but my grandchildren taught me that love can heal even the deepest wounds. Sometimes you have to burn a bridge to save the people standing on it. And sometimes the most expensive check you ever write is the one that buys you your freedom. Truth does not just set you free, it builds a future. If you believe that real family is built on love and not money, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to protect someone you love from their own family?